This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today brings something very different to my podcast. My first graffiti artist, a speed painter, author, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, Erik Wahl. His newest work is what we dig into today, the spark and the grind. Trust me, just for your own creative smack in the head, after you listen to this podcast, go take a look at some of the videos of Erik on stage, what he is doing in terms of presentation. We are all being forced to raise our game once we're exposed to Erik's work. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Erik Wahl. So Erik, there's this great documentary that I've seen a couple times. It's a Pink Floyd documentary. It's about making the dark side of the moon. And Roger Waters is just so reflective. He's so great in there. And he starts talking about the song Brain Damage, and everyone will recognize the lyric. The lyric goes something to the effect, the lunatic is on the grass, and you got to keep the loonies on the path. And I hear this song for years and years and years. I have no idea what it means, right? Waters, I think he was at Oxford, and they've got all this beautiful grass and all these paths, and you're not allowed on the damn grass. And he was just making fun of the idea that all these smart kids, he's now calling them the lunatics. The lunatics have to be on the path. And I'm thinking to myself, when I'm looking at your work, what a great spark. But there's that great spark. There's the great idea. But to watch Pink Floyd in the studio making the dark side of the moon, there's the grind.
Isn't it beautiful, though? That is the delicious agony of the creative process. There is structure, there's grinding, there's hard work, there's understanding of the rules. In this case, the 8 basic notes and the space between the notes and melody. So there's an understanding of all of that. And then it's that spark to push it further, to test boundaries, to step into the grass, to be able to understand the path and the grass so you can create and translate. And, the Pink Floyd, the Doors, there's so many great philosophers that have gone before us as artists to kind of talk about pop culture, about life, about joy and pain, as well as suffering and love. I love how artists are able to navigate both worlds and share through melody, like Pink Floyd so beautifully did.
And what I especially love about that, too, when I'm in the middle of your work and I've watched you online, is that this idea, and so many of us do it, it could be at the coffee shop or whatever, we'll have that great idea. But usually, often, I guess in my life, as a guy who's done a bunch of books and I've done a film, I kind of get this. You've given me a framework to think about it. I kind of just was doing it instinctively, is you have that great idea, and then if you've done a great idea and you've executed, you kind of know what comes next. Okay, now I have to buckle down and I have to make it happen. And you can't do one without the other. And I know you spend most of your life trying to get people to see this, but it's a tough thing to get across to people that have not lived it.
That's what I do for a living. That's why I feel like I have a competitive advantage in the marketplace, is I'm able to translate that concept, in this case, in corporate. That's most of what I'm doing is speaking and performing on the corporate lecture circuit. But it's not an either or. It's not a binary, you either are creative or not creative. It's yes and. So whether you think you are more analytical, more of a numbers guy or gal, or whether you feel yourself as more creative or whimsical, you are both. And creativity is not something you achieve, it's not something you conquer and achieve. It's something you receive. It's something you tap into. And that's what's interesting is you talk with anyone. If I talk with anyone, even who is a diehard card-carrying member of the logical, analytical numbers family, you realize that they have great ideas. They experience creativity. It just usually stops there. You think, it would be a great idea. It would be cool is if they, and they talk about breakthrough ideas, but the real challenge is how to follow through on those ideas and give them traction and translate them to scale. And that's where I help entrepreneurs and corporations how to really sink their teeth into innovation and disruption, how to truly and visibly differentiate from the competition, how to enhance brand value, how to create unique customer experiences. That's all innovation and creativity. It's just a matter of how we leverage it and use it.
Let me take you back in time. As a young man, and dealing with thoughts of creativity as a young person, when did you start to, because there's been a lot of different stages in your life, when did you start to, as a very young person, maybe you didn't have the vocabulary to describe what you were feeling, but when, as a very young person, did you start to feel this creative urge? I know you're going to say very young. We all do feel it very young, but I want you to talk about you. When did you start to feel this creative urge, and talk about some of the perhaps support or roadblocks that you felt as a very young person scratching that creative itch?
When I was young, I didn't feel creative or uncreative. I just was. I lived out loud without comparison, without ego. I just lived from a place of passion and creativity. And what happened was, at a very early age, I was put, I went to school like everyone else. I was affirmed for doing well on my spelling test, affirmed for doing well on my mathematics, on my science. And I was actually told that, coloring or drawing wasn't my strength. I wasn't that great of an artist because I colored outside the lines, because I went too fast, because I didn't pay attention to detail. So actually that was my grade 4 in my elementary school process, and I actually stopped drawing altogether at that point. I was a good student. I was a good listener, so I pursued all of the reading, writing, and arithmetics, and I went through my entire academic education and didn't pursue the arts at all, even though I knew I enjoyed them. I enjoyed creating, but you can't make any money as an artist. That isn't a practical job. That's what you do after the hard work's done. Then you can maybe have some whimsy or frolic or color a little bit after the real work is done. And so that was really my entire experience. I was an athlete and I was a numbers guy for the first 30 years of my life. I went to school to get into a good college so that I could get great grades, so that I could get a business degree, and so that I could make a lot of money and then retire and be happy. It didn't exactly work out the way my game plan was drawn up. And I love Mike Tyson's quote, everyone has a game plan until you get punched in the face. And I got... Was that your game plan, or just the game plan that society was giving you? Good question. For me, it was the game plan that society had given me, but I was an accomplice. I felt absolutely, yes, this made sense to me, that if I get straight A's, I will be successful in my pursuits. That hard work, that discipline, that accountability would all pay off in spades. You put one in, you get one out. You make deposits, you take withdrawals. First into the office, last to leave. Be the hardest worker. And all of those things were good. All those things were very healthy for me as a young man, starting to develop who I was ultimately supposed to be. But what happened is when the dot-com bomb hit in 99, 2000, I got wiped out. Largely because I graduated from college at a very unfortunate time where everything that anyone touched turned to gold. That was the dot-com era, where you buy a stock at 12 and you wake up the next morning and it's at 28. And it was an exciting, adrenaline-filled time, but for someone like myself who didn't have a long history in the market, who wasn't familiar with upswings and downswings, I felt like this was a whole new world, as Disney would say, and that I was going to be able to 10x my income way before any of my logical predecessors who talked about price-earnings ratio or value, and I had figured out the formula to success that I was secretly using to basically day trade myself to financial independence, which I know that sounds goofy now, but when you're doubling your net worth every 6 months or so because of your effective trading, that became my ideology. And I was very content with my trading success, but it really had nothing to do with my knowledge, with my insight, with my acumen at reading markets. It had to do with everything was going north at that point until everything went south, and it crushed me. It was really a horrific time of my life because my entire identity, my ego, my happiness was all wrapped up in how many zeros I had in my bank account. When the stock market went up, I was smiling and happy. When the stock market went down, I was a little bit more agitated and disgruntled.
I put my first website up in 1996. I witnessed everything firsthand. I saw friends do very well. I saw friends not do so well. I think the interesting thing for us in reflection on that time period is that even though your particular situation did not go perhaps how you would have imagined it, there were plenty of people, and this becomes the luck skill conundrum, there were plenty of people that had perhaps zero skill during the dot-com era, and they made absolute bloody fortunes. To this day, they're still on the front covers of magazines, and it was just but for the stroke of luck. It was a crazy time period.
It really was, and I saw some geniuses be completely wiped out. Some very, very intelligent individuals who ran, I thought, very smart, cutting-edge companies where it just didn't match up in time, where if it was a different landscape, they would have crushed it. But unless they received additional VC dollars, unless they received additional input, they weren't going to be able to sustain. And that's what happened is the kind of rug was pulled out. And a lot of these, what really, in some cases, had potential viability for good companies were taken away because they didn't have any runway for cash any longer. I learned a lot of this in retrospect, and for me, it's all been kind of an education. That was an unfortunately painful learning experience, but I did learn it. And then as I watched in 2008, 2009, 2010, it happened to a lot of my colleagues and friends, and a lot of the companies that I work with all of a sudden hit the skids. This real estate bubble translated into a global macroeconomic bubble that put the brakes on for everybody. And fortunately, I didn't get stung by that one because I'd been stung before, and I had a more defensive position because I knew that, what goes up must come down. There are waves to be ridden, and I was young. I'm still young and naive, but slightly smarter than I was in my 20s and 30s.
Let me keep you at that moment for a second, because you have this devastating event happen, which forces change. And you're at the fork in the road, and you took a direction, and you went perhaps a very different direction. I'm sure there were some, you got to get by, you got to pay the bills and all that kind of stuff. But you reached back in time and you started to scratch an itch. Give me that transitional moment. Here you are. You're describing yourself as a trader during the dot-com era. It goes south. Okay, now we can all go online and we can see what you do today. That is quite the shift. How did that shift start to happen?
Sure. I would love to tell you that it was a triumphant pump my fist in the air. Now I am an artist. That just wasn't the way it works, and it's why I have now great empathy for other people who suffer, regardless what that suffering is. Mine happened to have been financial loss, but for me, at that point, as a 29-year-old young man, that was the most important thing in my life. Now, I told people that family was the most important thing in my life, but my life didn't actually reflect that. It was my financial security. Through that loss of my financial security, after 29 years of working my ass off in school and corporate America and all of the knowledge that I thought I had accumulated, to be left with nothing, to actually be in the red at age 29 was a huge blow to my ego. I no longer could talk about what job I had or how many cars I drove or how many houses I was going to own or where I vacationed. And I'm being a bit facetious there, but truly that was a lot of where my identity was wrapped up in. And so for me, that was the transition, the changing point when I went from being purely an analytical, logical, numbers-driven alpha male into scratching for life and meaning for a reason to get up in the morning. And I think there's a lot of very unhealthy channels that I could have taken to numb this pain. And the reason it was so devastating for me, and some people have health challenges, some people have relationship challenges. This was a very heavy burden for me to bear, and I didn't have any faculties by which to be able to take this on and say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I had all of those cliches in my head, but I hadn't experienced this kind of suffering or setback ever before in my life. And so I needed to, at this point, build my plane while I flew it. I had to find a way through this. And I actually found great solace and comfort with other artists in the community. Now, I didn't know them prior to, but as, I didn't have work to go to anymore, so I was trying to, go to either coffee shops or whatever to try and figure out what was my next move to rebuild my fort. And I just found a lot of comfort in the way artists thought. I started to hang out with them, and then I started to paint. But I also realized that they had some real shortcomings. They had, even though they were very creative, they were very disruptive, they were very provocative, they didn't have a lot of understanding on how to translate those ideas to scale. And so a lot of times they became depressed. They became self-absorbed. They felt like they operated on the fringes and that the world just didn't get them because they weren't on the path. They were in the grass, and they expected the world to understand them rolling around in the grass. And the world just doesn't. The world understands the path. That was where I saw and experienced an epiphany that I need to take this experience in the grass, take these disruptive, cool, breakthrough ideas, and translate them so that people on the path can understand them, so that people on the path can understand what's going on in the grass and see new ideas and be able to make them actionable and implement them into their lives and into their business.
I just watched you on stage from afar, from Southeast Asia, painting a picture of Bono from a couple years back, live on stage. I need to kind of, I think the audience does too. I want to have a feeling of how that happened. You're at this collapse moment in the .com bubble. I can completely relate to that. I know the feeling of San Diego. You were in San Diego at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When did you put the brush in your hand? How did that happen?
That was from a behavioral psychologist I was kind of walking through this in therapy. They recommended that I need to break this downward spiral, this pattern, to break free from this self-imposed suffering and turmoil. And part of it was, hey, you should go travel, or you should do something you did as a kid, like painting or drawing. I'd lost all my income. I didn't have any discretionary finances to be able to go and to travel and to go find myself. So it was really this default, a personal budget cutback that led me to, I could afford a brush and some paint. And so just out of, to get him off my back, or just to do what I was told, I went and started painting. And it was a release of some endorphins in my mind that gave me hope again. And so I found myself painting and drawing and sketching, and then doing photography, and then researching artists, the masters of the past. I just could not get enough. So it was an insatiable curiosity into this field of art that I'd known about logically, but had never pursued because it really didn't make there was no ROI in creativity. There was no substance in becoming or being an artist. So it was a relearning process, because I no longer I didn't need to make income at this point. I needed to make a breath. I needed to at least find my footing and find life. It wasn't about, can I make money at this? It was, can I wake up tomorrow and be okay? And that was what art did, is it gave me a reason to be excited again. And I think my accelerated learning, the reason I ramped so quickly in every way, is because I couldn't get enough of it. Everything about what I did, I wanted to spend time with artists, and I wanted to learn, how did they create? How did they envision? How did they share? And so the actual mastery of illustrating or photorealism or abstraction all came as a result of just wanting to know more, wanting to dive deeply into something, this new subject that was just made brand new to me. So it was really a love of the art more than anything else that ramped me so quickly into kind of a platform to be able to be recognized as a professional artist.
I hate to generalize, but when I think of what the typical impression of artists might be, I think most people will look, perhaps watch, they can see you paint a picture and they'll say, oh, he's just got a natural talent. He's got a natural skill. He was just born with it. He didn't have to do anything. And it's so far from the truth. I'll share one quick story. I had an attorney, my first attorney, a very accomplished guy, went to Duke, a very accomplished attorney, very successful. At some point in time in midlife, I believe around in his 40s, he decided he didn't want to be an attorney anymore. And he started studying and studying and studying and practicing and practicing and practicing. And now the man he's featured in galleries across the states. And so I think that's one thing that people don't appreciate about art is often like, you can talk about this transition and that this .com era event happened to you, but it wasn't like you just woke up and you had a natural dormant talent. You had to work, you had to grind to make it happen.
I did, and I loved that grind. So it was not a cumbersome, onerous grind. Now, for sure, it was very hard work. At times, it was very structured. I would, set my alarm for 4:30 and 5 a.m. to get up and to either write. At that time, I was starting to work on a presentation, and I started to paint. But it was that process of routine and structure, and that's really where I kind of I coined this paradox, is that structure creates freedom. Discipline is what builds creativity. And so much like your turtle theory, like John Locke's tabula rasa theory, you give me a blank slate, I'll give you anything that you want. Through hard work, discipline, structure, routine, reverse engineering, is we can figure this out. We can deconstruct any topic and make someone an expert, because an expert in anything was once a beginner. And it's oftentimes our cognitive biases, our self-narrative, our perception of ourselves and others is what defines and limits ourselves. And those labels become disabling. And once I removed those labels from me, all of a sudden, artist became very accessible. Writer became very accessible. Keynote speaker became very accessible. So all of these concepts that felt very distant to me, or like, oh, that's for gurus, or that's for poets or experts, all of a sudden because I didn't have any necessary business model attached to it, is I had freedom to explore. And then once I found and come up with these new ideas, then I used my past business knowledge, my past academics, my past understanding of what hard work looked like, and I was able to apply it to this concept, this new concept of creativity. What I realized also very early on, that art was not about producing a product, but rather art was about producing thinking. And that was what was happening to me, is I was expanding my consciousness through this exploration of art. And everything came into focus with more clarity, because art was the process by which that I filtered information. I began to think laterally, see in different dimensions, feel in different dimensions, whereas my first dimension was linear, logical, algorithmic. And that's not bad. It's just when it gets out of balance, that's where we run into problems and we become too myopic. I became too myopic, and that's what led to my demise, is I was too linear in how I approached life, how I approached my business, how I approached my finances. And it was a shortcoming for me that I had to learn the hard way. So now I'm much more balanced. I understand all of the hard work and logic and discipline, but I use it in proper proportion along with insights and intuition and emotion and imagination and breakthrough thinking. So I hold them like I would almost talk about or use an example of a soccer player or a basketball player. Just because you've got great handles or great dribbling skills doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the game. You have to play with your head up. You have to be so confident in your skills that you can play and see the entire field with peripheral view to be able to create openings and options that you could not create alone, just simply with good individual skills. And so that's what happened to me, is I was able to all of a sudden operate and play with my head up and see a myriad of different potentials.
As you talk, I'm thinking about a guest that I had in this show, a guy named Anders Ericsson, and he was the kind of the guy that gave Malcolm Gladwell the foundation for writing about deliberate practice.
Yep.
What would have really been fun is to look at the neuroscience, the scanning of this could happen with anybody who's gone through a major change in their life, but to look at the scanning of perhaps your mind and the changes that took place physically, because that's the interesting thing about this, is that when you put yourself into these new situations where you're activating your mind in a different way, it's literally changing what's inside the mind. It's not just our thoughts. I mean, it's literally a reshaping of the interior of our cranium, so to speak. It's quite fascinating, and it would have been really fun to see those kind of before and after scans, the different activation areas that would be taking place before and after. You know what I mean?
I would love to see them as much as you. And fortunately, technology is getting to the point where we'll be able to see all of those things. But for me, I knew it was a new feeling, a new lease on life that was exciting, and it was really a mind, body, spirit connection that I'd not understood, the three working together. I think I'd had one of them very, very much dialed, and the other two kind of fell by the wayside. But as I began to experience all three in harmony, everything became increasingly clear to me, became increasingly more fun and enjoyable. And I still experience, great suffering and joy, just like everyone else, but I have a different connection to my emotions now, to my reactions to what's taking place around me. I allow myself to experience emotions deeply. I love them. I just am not as knee-jerk or monkey brain or lizard brain, monkey mind as I used to be. Now I have, and that is a great mental toughness skill. That is a great discipline that I've learned in being able to breathe into challenges, to embrace and feel that instinct of fear and remain unflinchingly calm and still make wise, educated, and sometimes breakthrough decisions or disruptions along the way. And that's a discipline, and that's mental toughness at its finest.
Let me get you up on stage for a moment, and the audience will have to go take a peek at some of your videos. But I think one of the things that probably happens, I'm imagining, so here I've got you on stage, you're physically fit, your mind is active, you're giving a lot of energy, you're speaking to very accomplished, often sizable audiences, very large audiences, quite a show that you're putting on, frankly. I mean, really, I'm as a guy I've given presentations before, 1,500 Chinese before. But I've never done a presentation like you've done. So I was watching it thinking, oh my gosh, okay, this guy's sparking me on the presentation side of things. But I'm imagining the audience that is taking you in for the first time. And I'm looking at a word that I've got kind of the biggest word on my notes that I have right now in front of me is atrophy. Okay. Yeah. And I'm thinking that, if I'm in an audience and I'm in the corporate world, perhaps I'm clocking in each day. I'm doing my job. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. In many ways, what's going on inside of me has atrophied. And so then I take the full-blown, the fire hose to the mouth from Erik on stage, and it's got to be a little bit of a fun shocker for people, but it's got to be a little intimidating too, because even though I can hear your story, and it's like, okay, this is fascinating. The guy's he's at this nice peak with the .com era. He's making good money. He blows up. He refines himself. He shifts into another career and takes off. It looks good on paper. It sounds good on paper. But my God, I appreciate it. I can feel the steps from you. But for the average person that never got off that kind of, I got the good grades in high school, I got the right job, I'm in the right corporate job, it's got to be a little overwhelming to take in the idea of the spark and the grind.
The thing that I enjoy so much about performing live in front of particularly corporate audiences is that I'm a bit alarming. I'm different than the keynote speaker they saw last year on leadership or change management or customer service. So I physically look different than the last speaker the second I take the stage. But the first thing I do is I create a painting choreographed to rock music in 3 minutes. And that's done with the very specific intention of disrupting their experience. That they were expecting one thing, and I've zigged when they've zagged. And I've done something that is just kind of cool and very entertaining with the videos that I've used. And that's the first thing. The second thing that I do is I do tremendous amount of homework and research before every single presentation, whether I'm speaking to financial services, whether I'm speaking to retail, manufacturing, engineering, attorneys, physicians, is I know their world inside and out because of all the homework that I've done. And so the fact that this long-haired Gen X hipster artist not only just created a painting in 3 minutes, but is understanding our language, our regulatory challenges, our competitive landscape, the global economy. The fact that I can speak to those things from an educated standpoint also catches them off guard. And so I realize that every single person in that audience is viewing me with skepticism. They're looking at me and thinking, artist. They're thinking what their past experiences are, and I'm kind of systematically disrupting each one of those, not by telling them, but by showing them. And so it's a world of invitation where I'm not showing them the importance of creativity or innovation or disruption, but rather I'm showing them real time the opportunities that are open to them if they were to knock off those blinkers, if they were to view their own abilities and capabilities from a little different perspective. And the way that I do that is I go back through the psychology of how we learned, the art of learning, why we learned a specific way, why our industrial factory academic standardized school system is set up the way that it is, why that is in some ways helpful for our young children, but in many ways very harmful for their ability to remain curious and remain have that exploring nature. And so when you talk about trend hunting, when you talk about trend seeking and looking at the future, you can't do that by historical analysis. You have to live it live. You have to understand consumer behavior, and what worked last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, isn't going to work today just because it was in a textbook. You've got to experience it real time. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm experiencing this real time, and I'm making it accessible to those logical linear thinkers using their language, not assuming that, hey, I don't want them to think, oh, he was a really cool artist or that was a great show, and then be over and go back to their normal analytical life. Is I want them to embrace these concepts, these ideas. And I'm not a motivational speaker. I cringe a little bit when people say he's a motivational speaker, because I see myself as a thought leader on the psychology of performance who happens to be inspiring, not because I'm a rah-rah guy, but because I've just opened up their mind. And a mind once stretched never returns to its original dimensions. And so the audience, I change the molecules in the room through music, through lighting, through my performance, through my customization, is I'm building a connection, an authentic connection with the audience that pulls them into a new world, like if you were going to experience theater or if you're going to experience a live concert. Is those experiences are far more fascinating to me than a keynote speaker with a slide deck talking about 3 take-home points about how to be more creative.
No one pays attention to any of those guys, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, a very cheeky phrase that's been used in the past is give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. The thing is we all want to just be given a fish. We want to go to a conference and we want to be given a fish. We want to go to school and we want to be given a fish. We don't want to take the time and do the hard work and have the discipline of learning how to fish, because I could tell them about creativity. I could tell them about disruption, but it's going to be different tomorrow. And everything's going to have changed unless you know how to have mental dexterity and agility. You're going to be left behind, and you're going to have to use these same skills and teach yourself again and again and again. And it's actually an exciting beginner's mind relearning process, not an onerous, I learned how to use last year's remote control with all of that text, and now they've changed it up, and now I'm just behind again. It's an exciting wave of trying to ride the momentum of current trends, and I find it fascinating. I find it exciting, and the thing that I find most useful is that most people are afraid of it. Most people are concerned at the rate of change, and so it's being used against them. I actually use it for myself as a competitive advantage and look for changes to be able to, again, zig when everyone else is zagging.
Hey, by the way, you said long-haired Generation X artist who also looks like he can bench press 300 pounds. You left that part out.
that goes back to my athletic background. I work out very, very hard. I eat very, very clean. That's just what I enjoy doing. I love the grind of the gym. And just like, with going to the gym, I have to face resistance to get stronger. I have to sweat and grind and work out. And if I don't receive that, if I don't get that from my workout, I feel like I cheated myself. And the same thing with creativities. I have to grind through the uncertainty, do the hard work, experience setbacks, and that's the only point at which I grow. Most people quit when they experience a setback or uncertainty within the field of creativity, and they go right back to a default language of what they know, the numbers. You have to be willing to push past and understand that growth and comfort cannot coexist. And so the same principles that I use in working out, the same principles that I use with my wife, who I've been married to for 22 years, and we have 3 teenage boys, pushing through pain points and using those to grow our relationship, grow our business, grow our health, grow my art. It's all about overcoming resistance and growing stronger through adversity.
Let me get into grinding for a moment, and I want to tear this apart a little bit. People are probably having an image in their mind about what your definition of grinding might be. But one thing that I like in your work that I've seen you talk about, which is it's a great reminder, even for myself, I jotted it down. I'm like, God, that's just so nice. When you're grinding, you can get into it, and you've talked about the guys and the numbers, and you just kind of keep your eyes on the path, and you don't ever diverge, or you lose that plasticity. And that's really important, because once that flexibility goes away, and once your ability to not see something new, for example, and this happened in your life, right? And probably multiple times, but that talent, or that talent that's learned to take the divergent, that talent that's learned to be flexible when you're in the grinding mode, that's hard. And you give this great example. I would love for you to tell the story. You talk about Nolan Bushnell, and I can remember back in the 70s, using the Atari for the first time, seeing the Atari 2600 for the first time. And obviously, Nolan Bushnell had a fantastic career with Atari and has, done extremely well. But 2 guys crossed his path at some point in time in Atari's heyday. 2 young guys crossed his path, and he wasn't so divergent, and he didn't have that plastic feeling in his decision making at that moment in time, did he?
He didn't, and that's the beauty of those stories. Is we're quick to shout out what we view as instant success stories or overnight successes. We don't oftentimes look back at the long, sordid, jagged history of what has led to these successes or demises. And, fortunately, Nolan is one of those individuals who experienced both real high upsides and some tough downsides. And he went on from there and started Chuck E. Cheese. And so he was kind of that perfect example of a serial entrepreneur who probably would have excelled in virtually any number of different industries because he just had that drive. Now, he, like all of us, have certain shortcomings. He missed a couple of big paydays that could have happened with Atari. I don't think he's losing sleep over it because he just moved on to something else. But the history behind them shows both opportunity and setbacks within the same sentence. And I love the fact that not everything is dualistic and binary, is that it's a jagged path to success. And being able to absorb some of those challenges and setbacks and unforeseen roadblocks and being able to navigate new paths, I think is very exciting. Nolan's a great example of that.
I think that to give some feeling of people listening is that essentially Wozniak and Jobs approached him and said, hey, this is what we want to do. And Bushnell passed.
Yep. That's he probably hears that story again now and shakes his head a little bit, but it actually makes the better story. And it doesn't make for the bigger bank account for him, but that is fun to be able to say the fish that got away. So he does have still the story, and maybe that makes his live presentations or dinner conversations that much more entertaining because he didn't bag the elephant on that particular one, but he went back and had some other very successful ventures.
Yeah, but it's that ability to have that divergence that, even for myself, yourself, and anybody at any point in time in life, the people that are in the corporate audience that you're speaking to, you're trying to get people to imagine that even though you might have dedicated 10 years or 20 years, 30 years to a particular direction, if another direction comes, is to have that flexibility and mindset to at least be open to it, recognize it, and if it's a lot better than when you're currently at, to go down that path.
That is the punchline. That is the defining moment of our lives, is to understand, yes, even though we've been successful, even though this is familiar and comfortable, is there still multiple other options that are taking place at the exact same time, at any time in our lives. And that's why mental agility and flexibility, elasticity is really, I think, the most valuable skill in every single industry going forward in 2017 and beyond, is because things are moving so quickly, because consumer behavior is moving so quickly. Economic trends, political trends, they're moving so quickly. Is all we have is our flexibility to be able to adapt. I think that's the number one trait that isn't taught in schools, really needs to be for our children to survive, and our leaders and parents and adults and professionals need to start adopting and adapting these philosophies of the beginner's mind, being able to look at challenges and opportunities again for the first time, see them with fresh eyes, and to look at them as if they're a blank canvas with limitless possibilities, as opposed to preconceived narratives or biases on what this should be. It's not looking for expectations to be affirmed, it's looking for experiences to be lived.
Erik, we could go all day. I could keep picking your mind and pushing. The new book is The Spark and the Grind, Ignite the Power of Disciplined Creativity. It really is such a, as someone who likes to create things in a different world, I appreciate the title, because before I got into it, I was not really thinking, okay, what exactly? But then I get into it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just like, it's the story of everyone's life. Everyone, there are great ideas and no follow through, or there's lots of follow through and not very good ideas. I mean, it's something that we all go through, and I think it really is inspiring. And I also have to find, at some point in time, I have to get in the same room when you're giving one of your presentations, because I think, as someone who has done a few presentations, I already realize I need to up my game. So thank you for that.
Hey, well, and that's part of, what I do is I'm pushing the envelope. Is I've got this picture of what the keynote experience is going to look like in the future. And I see drone cameras, lipstick cameras inside my paintbrushes, and 360 degrees. I see holographic images. I see virtual reality. I see artificial intelligence. All of these things that I feel like technology is so slow to the game, because I've already got these things envisioned in my mind, and I can't wait to use them from the stage, because it's pushing me into another stratosphere where it's difficult to compete, because I'm creating a rock show and delivering actionable content at the same time. I love what I get to do, and I love the fact that it's called a keynote or it's called a lecture, but what I'm really doing is creating a multidimensional theatrical experience where I'm fascinating the audience into thinking a little bit differently. I'm not pointing my fingers and convicting. I'm really opening up their eyes and mind to thinking differently from an inspired perspective.
Look, it's just like when I go to a Cirque show, which I did in Vegas in the fall. I don't wake up and say to myself, my gosh, I'm going to compete with the Cirque show. They've got that market cornered. And I think you're definitely going down a path where you're going to make it really difficult for other keynote speakers to compete in terms of creativity. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I went to Cirque in Vegas and immediately was on the phone with them, with their corporate headquarters in Toronto the next day, flying them out to come and work with me and my production team on visuals and cues and timing. So they watched my presentation live and then gave me additional feedback on how to take my show to the next level from a Cirque perspective. So that's a great example.
Yeah, I saw the Michael Jackson show. It's just it's quite amazing. Their work is you're just like, wow.
It is.
That's all you can say is wow, right? They're the top of the heap in terms of that right now. Hey, where's the best place we can send people? The book is available. We can send people in terms of a website. Where's the best place, Erik?
My website's theartofvision.com. unchaintheelephant.com, and it has all my social media channels. I'm not big into selling product. Everything that I have is really available for free. The content is all there that I'm just looking to share. The book that was published by Random House on March 7 is a curation or a collection of a lot of my thoughts and ideas that I've been presenting live for the last 4 years, and curated them into what I'm really proud of as kind of a new manifesto for how to operate in the 2017 and beyond. It is the discipline and the creativity of success to work together as yin and yang, not as an either or. So that's kind of the meaning behind the spark and the grind is yes and. It's the yin and the yang of complementary forces working together to create breakthrough ideas.
You know, I didn't say it on this show, and I'll leave it with this, but I think one of the things that I've seen you, I can feel it on this episode, I can see in your live presentation, the energy, right? It doesn't make a difference what age you are. You got to bring the energy. You got to bring it. You don't just get old. That's ridiculous. Keep the energy, right?
Here's a secret side note: is I'm a huge introvert. So am I. Yeah, I have great difficulty at cocktail receptions or dinner parties or meet and greets because there's elements of unknown, and it just kind of sucks the energy from me. Now I can do them, I can participate in them, but I get drained. When I'm alone, when I'm by myself, when I'm writing, even when I'm performing, it's a solo act where I'm in my truest element. I really am an introvert, even though I believe I come across as fairly dynamic and fairly extroverted. I'm very quiet when I'm not doing interviews or on stage.
That would be a whole nother conversation, and I'm sure we could probably go down the path and find that across the creative spectrum, introversion is probably a lot more popular than people imagine. But it probably trends with technology, looking for sanctuaries of peace, and social media has taken over and maybe made introverts of many of us because we're just looking to get away for a little bit, and I think that's possibly true maybe of me. I maybe was more extroverted before, but have been more self-contained, or maybe I get so much joy from my family that I don't need to go out and have great big parties, but that's just, you're right. That's a conversation for another time. Yeah, I was going to say, I can guarantee you after one of your presentations, the last thing you want to do is be around people. You want to chill and get away.
I need some water, some hydration, and some rest. And I don't mean that to be, I'm not a prima donna. That's just, I need some time because I left it all on the field. I left every ounce of my energy on the stage, and I just need a couple of moments to regroup and recenter before I can get out and be public again.
I appreciate that, and I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Hey, Erik, it was great. It was great chatting. Thank you for your insights today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you to anyone who listened past the fact that they heard I was a graffiti artist early on in the episode. If you listened to the end, I'm very grateful that you took a risk on this podcast. I hope you got something out of it, and I'm really thankful for your interest in what I'm doing and for everyone who's listened. I really am grateful.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.